Okay, I will just let everybody know that we've started. Hello to people who are joining us online. And I think I'll just stand here and do this now. So we'd just like to say welcome to everybody, and no more than that, because I'm going to introduce Professor John McAuliffe, who is the Professor of Poetry at the University of Manchester Centre for New Writing, and he's Director of the university-wide research platform Creative Manchester, and he's going to welcome everyone formally to the event. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Victoria, and I'm over here in the dual mode perch on the side of the room, which many of us at the University of Manchester know. So hello to everybody online as well. So my name is John McAuliffe, and I am welcoming you as Director of Creative Manchester today, and welcoming everybody who is joining us online as well. This is also an event that we're recording, as you all know, and I think it's going to be a really, really valuable resource for us to be able to use with future collaborators, to give them a sense of what it is we're doing, what it is we do here, but also what it is, what are the problems that people have faced, and how we're trying to circumvent them as we work on partnerships like this. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Creative Manchester now, because it's still new. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that, and then I'm going to talk to you about the format of today's event. So Creative Manchester is the university's new platform for bringing together researchers across different disciplines whose work on creative methods and in creative industries speaks to and informs key forces that shape our culture and society. One of the key insights of the research that we're going to be looking at today, which very much speaks to our concerns, is how partnership works, and how we can also recognize barriers to partnership, and then create ways of navigating those barriers in order to develop mutually beneficial partnerships. The research's key questions are questions we ask ourselves all the time. Can universities and cultural leaders really change policy when they work together? And these are questions you might want to bring up again afterwards for the panel discussion. What difference does our research make to the practicalities of running a cultural organization? And very practically, where do you start if you're interested in collaborating? At Creative Manchester, we have existing relationships in the creative and cultural industry sector with Community Arts Northwest and with Manchester Camerata, who we're going to hear from today, but also with institutions like the Whitworth and the Manchester Museum, with theatres and publishers, and with festivals like Manchester International, Manchester Histories, and Manchester Literature Festival. We are more aware than we need to be about how tricky but essential translation or mediation is to make these partnerships work and to make them sustainable. So sometimes, and maybe we will hear this later, researchers, practitioners, and creative industries businesses are on the same page about designing research whose purposes are clear to both parties and whose benefits are mutual. But what this research shows, and what an event like this brings home, is the kind of hard work that's needed to ensure that these partnerships do bring sustainable benefits to everybody involved. Our incentive, of course, is the excellent work which arises from what Camerata do and what Community Arts Northwest do and what Ambrose does, and how we can support that. But it's also against the big picture of the UK's kind of sustained interest in making sure that money is spent on research and development in this and other sectors. So the format today is that we're going to be hearing initially from academics who worked on or have responded to the Creative Industries Deep Dive Aspect project, which is supported by funding from Aspect, an organisation which draws together academics and industry leaders to address social challenges and to encourage and commercialise social science research. We're lucky to be joined by one of the lead researchers, Dr. Alicia J Rouverol of Manchester and Salford, who will speak to the work she did and to the work she did with Dr. Samuel Stockley Patel at York. Their research question asked, and I hope I'm not getting across what you're saying, Alicia, but it's a good question and one we'll all be bearing in mind. What constitutes best practice in creative industries business engagement between arts, social science, and creative practice researchers and companies? After hearing from Alicia, we're going to hear from Sam's colleague at York, Dr. J T Welch. And then we're going to hear from Stella Barnes from Community Arts Northwest and Rebecca Parnell about her work as a creative producer with Manchester Camerata. We're going to highlight the challenges and the impacts of their collaborative work. So there's then going to be an opening up of that discussion to another panel, which is going to be chaired by our colleague, Dr. Abby Gilmore. And Abby will speak a little bit to that after the first section ends. So before I welcome Alicia, who's going to take over now, I want to also just mention for the record and to thank our event partners who worked with us in Creative Manchester to make today possible. So especially Aspect, the ESRI, the Festival of Social Science, Manchester Camerata, Community Arts Northwest, the Faculty of Humanities Research and Business Engagement teams, all of our colleagues at Creative Manchester, and Victoria Barker, of course, who has magicked all of this together. So thank you to all of them, and also to the Alliance Business School for hosting us today. So I'm going to hand over now to Alicia, and I'm going to remind you online as well, please do make notes of questions you might like to ask us, because we really do want to learn from what it is you need to know about what we have learned. Okay, Alicia.
Great. Thanks, John. Appreciate that. Okay, great. So thanks so much for that introduction, John, and setting the context. I'm going to talk today about the Creative Industries Deep Dive Project. I'm going to give you a brief overview. Essentially, this was an exploration of best practice in creative industries business engagement with arts, humanities, and social sciences research in Yorkshire, Humber, and Greater Manchester regions. This was funded by Aspect and has been a collaboration between the University of York, where I worked with Dr. Samuel Stockley Patel, and he was the lead there, and I was the lead on the Manchester end of the project. We conducted these regional deep dives and created outputs specific to both Greater Manchester and to Yorkshire Humber regions. And that featured a collaborative output that considered broader creative industries best practice in business engagement and regionally informed but nationally relevant outputs. So just a word about those outputs in a bit more detail. So essentially, we created a business engagement report. There were reports for both the Manchester region and Yorkshire. We did a good practice for social sciences and creative industries business engagement report. Good practice guide aimed at HEI business engagement staff, and short interest grabber aimed at creative industries companies. Social media content was then pulled from the material and disseminated out of both universities. In addition, we kept the recordings on our side to create a Creative Manchester archive, and those transcripts and related ephemera, reports on business engagement practice, in fact, reports created by some of the interviewees in the room, are featured in that archive. So we think that that will be a very valuable resource in time to come. Just a word about our methodology, 45 interviews with actually 46 interviewees, let's get that accurate, in Greater Manchester, Yorkshire, and Humber regions, 26 academics in total from universities of Leeds, York, Sheffield, Leeds, Beckett, Met, Salford, and Manchester. Academics partnered with organizations across the CCIs, and that would include theater and performance, gaming, film, and television, museums and galleries, architecture, visual arts, publishing, and heritage. 20 CCI professionals were interviewed, and those were in gaming, theater, performance, and music, visual arts, film, TV, and media arts, again, museums and galleries, literature festivals, and community arts, as well as government agencies and arts consultancies. This featured large companies and national portfolio organizations, micro companies and SMEs, Yorkshire and Northeast. There were 5 in total, Northwest 10, the Southeast 4, and the Midlands 1, just to give you a sense of regions. And in addition, as part of the interviews, we did questionnaires, which allowed a broader range of individuals to participate. So I thought I would just start briefly in this area of engagement and models to define business engagement. Several people ask us this over the course of the project. It is quite broad and focused, value-added activities linked to a partnership with non-academic audiences or organizations rather. Those would include business, public, and third sector organizations. We did find, when I say we, this was really Stockley Patel's findings more. He found there was a breakdown between engagement about, engagement with, and engagement for. And essentially these matched rather academic, applied, or collaborative models. Engagement about would be academic-led, where industry provides access, essentially. Engagement with would be applied research, where the interests are tailored more to the partner organizations. And engagement for, which featured collaborative projects that were really collaborative from the get-go. And these would be academic and industry partners mutually involved. And I think much of our discussion today will focus on that latter point. Lastly, certainly on my side in particular in Manchester, we focused a lot on collaboration labs. Manchester is quite strong for that, and collaborative PhDs. We'll be hearing from one later in the presentation today. There we go. Let's go back to findings one. Here we go. So findings, essentially establishing partnerships. Partnerships generally evolve out of existing professional networks with few HEI researchers looking to their university's BE team to undertake their partnerships. I realize that's not happy news for people from the business engagement team, but that is indeed what we found. Rachel, I think, has had to head off. Rachel Kenyon, who we interviewed from Manchester, and she wanted me to remind people that actually their BE and KE team, that's knowledge exchange team, really are here to help. And even if we don't know a great deal about them, do be sure to be in touch with that office on campus if you are Manchester based and want to pursue a partnership. Key component of success includes managing of expectations with regard to pace and timing, delivery, outcomes, and equitable budgets, partnership and engagement infrastructure. BE teams broker partnerships and offer related support, including smaller pots of funding. So again, that's where the BE teams can be useful. Partnerships were often stymied, though, by bureaucracy, heavy teaching, marking loads, and ethics processes. Precarious contracts also resulted in inadequate staffing. Additional findings featured language and outputs. Language and terminology often proved divisive between CCI and HEI partners. I'm seeing many smiles in the audience, in part because people, I think, have encountered this on both sides. There's not always an understanding even of the terminology in the different arenas. BE officers often serve as translators to ameliorate these differences. Intercultural communication was deemed a critical area for exploration, and further training as part of navigating the fourth industrial, i.e. digital revolution. But in two important components at the close here, value added, essentially the essential components of partnerships for HEIs and CCIs were these value added components, and these were often motivators for collaboration. So those would include, for instance, exhibitions and performances and those types of engagement projects. But additionally, there was collaboration on grant writing, article production, etc. Certainly for people in academia, pursuing an article and having article outputs is quite vital. But oftentimes, even academic researchers commented that, in fact, there was much value to the knowledge exchange itself, even when it didn't materialize in a paper for the ref and a check mark. Lastly, the training into partnership. I came up with this on my side of the equation because there was so much going on in Manchester that's very strong in this. Placements and internships, so we're talking undergraduate as well as MA and PhD level. And those kinds of collaboration labs, collaborative PhDs, I think, are very useful for creating alternate career tracks for young academics. So just to close out with our project staff team, not everyone's in the room today due to other commitments, but we had quite a large team here. We've got Ian and John here both. Alex, I believe, is online, he's proved vital. We also had a team of very worthwhile and supportive transcribers, Sophie Lamb, Kat Dalziel, and Claire Haywood, to whom we're quite grateful. And of course, on the other side at York, we had Stockley Patel, as well as John Swords and Josie Hanby. So I'm going to hand it over now to J T Welch, my colleague at York. Great, thank you. Joe, great, okay.
Thanks, Alicia.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say a whole lot, I guess, or I'll be brief because I'm just joining the project. Actually, I'm Dr. J T Welch. I'm a senior lecturer in English and creative industries at the University of York. So I'm coming in from the York side, from the other side, and I guess I'm really grateful for the work that's been done already. I guess if that's one thing that I can kind of testify to is to just the usefulness of this kind of language and this kind of thinking and the familiarity, I guess, that you were talking about there, and the challenges of the different kinds of language and the logistical challenges with very different organizations, different institutions that have things set up in different ways. And my own experience at York is very similar to the things that were coming out from the interviewees. And even working, I guess, with the different colleagues who are named as part of this project, because people who from the York side, I guess you saw on that screen there, there's a big project, part of the ESRC Creative Industries, one of the centers, the XR Stories, which is mostly based with the theater, film, TV, and interactive media department there. And I'm on the other side of campus, and that there's a physical separation there, I guess, that adds to that that is more than symbolic, I guess. I guess it's working online so much the past 18 months has reminded me of just the importance of kind of physical connections in these kinds of collaborations as well, and be able to sit down over coffee and things. So we're getting back into that. I guess what I thought I could kind of supplement, if it's useful, is I guess just to emphasize that kind of translation that Alicia was talking about. It seems really important, my sense of that kind of the language that we use within academic context and non-academic context, but also within different disciplines as well. And this has been a really kind of interesting challenge, I think, coming from a humanities background myself, is that the emergence of what we might think of as the discipline of the creative industries and in research in this area, it has kind of different roots. If we're in the humanities, we might think about its kind of inheritance from a longer tradition of cultural studies and different kind of interdisciplinary approaches. But in the social sciences, there are different methodologies that have their own long traditions, and that's been exciting to see that there are really concrete kind of research skills that need translating, that we can take a project like this and kind of think that even within on campus, within a university, that we're having to translate and develop those kinds of languages, and those kinds of thinking about the about, the for, and the with, those different kinds of relationships. Just that different kinds of thinking, I think, has been really eye-opening. And it's if you haven't had a chance to read the reports, I think that to me is some of the most useful ways of just talking about what those relationships involve and kind of the practicalities. I guess just to give you a really kind of like brief taste of the kinds of things, again, really, we're going to have some case studies, I think, in a minute that we're going to go much more in depth, but from in a humanities context. I'm based in the Department of English and Related Literature at York. I also am the director of the Center for Modern Studies there, which is the interdisciplinary kind of research center on the humanities side, and we're sort of social sciences kind of sit alongside that. Where research overlaps with teaching as well, I guess, and thinking about some of these opportunities that we found really exciting. We've got, for instance, over the past years, we've been working with New Writing North, which is a writers development organization. Their offices they're based in Newcastle, so kind of further still. I think one of the things that comes out of the reports is that those regional differences aren't as important in the creative industries, that they're, except for the London and everywhere else. If you're in the everywhere else, a lot of things are very familiar in different sized cities or different regions or parts of the country. We're facing similar kinds of pressures and similar kinds of opportunities. So we've been working with New Writing North in our department and developing specific modules, specific kind of teaching opportunities where they kind of work as an intermediary, exactly like Alicia was talking about. They can, help us bring in professionals to do bits of teaching and turn a degree like English or literature into something that's a bit more vocational, a bit more hands-on, thinking about different kinds of skills but that turns around and feeds into the kind of research collaborations that we're talking about here. So out of that comes, our involvement with different prizes or students of ours doing research for an organization like that, or we've had students kind of reading things as sifters for different prizes, or going and doing internships and placements in different ways. So I guess that to me seems like an area, I guess, that we can keep thinking about as well. It seems quite exciting because I wouldn't separate, I guess, the teaching from the research side of things. And at York at the moment, we're developing postgraduate programs that are kind of trying to close that gap further and thinking about, especially, again, like I say, in humanities subjects where they don't have that kind of vocational tradition necessarily. There might be more, they're more practice-based, more hands-on subjects and things like in music or in theater and things, but in something like literature where it seems like, I guess this is the direction of travel in making something exciting and productive out of those different kinds of pressures to shift towards a more skills-oriented, a more employability kind of focused sort of education or product or service that we're providing students, that we ourselves can kind of like take part in that. So yeah, I'm just looking forward to hearing more and stuff and meeting more people who are involved in the project. It seems like a great opportunity. So I'm glad that we can work across, from York and Manchester.
Thank you. Should we go to case studies? You have been. I thought we'd got you with Camerata first, and then print out.
So I'll get your slides up. Hopefully, anyway, no worries.
Should be able to use the arrows.
Thank you. I hope I'm on my mark.
Where I should be.
I imagine I am. Hello, everyone. My name is Rebecca Parnell, and I'm a creative producer. I work in a joint role with Creative Manchester and Manchester Camerata, which is a chamber orchestra based in the city. Today, I'm here with my Manchester Camerata hat on. It does feel strange to be at the university with my Camerata hat on, but I am. And I'm representing our CEO, Bob Riley, who was unfortunately not able to attend today. But I'm going to be speaking about the long collaboration that we've had with the university and the many benefits it has brought us, some of the challenges, thankfully not too many, and the outcomes as well. Yes. Okay, so a little bit about Manchester Camerata. We are a registered charity, and we're very quickly approaching our 50th anniversary in 2022. So watch out for some really exciting programming coming from us. Last year, that's okay. Last year, 2020 to 2021, we were delighted to reach over 1.2 million people. That was largely through our digital projects. There were some live projects in there where restrictions allowed, but we were able, through research and development, to move a lot of our work online, and we were astounded by the number of people we were able to reach. We have been called Britain's most adventurous orchestra by the Times, which we are extremely proud of. And the Royal Philharmonic Society said we blazed a brilliant trail for what a 21st orchestra can do. So our output consists of life-changing dementia workshops, digital work, concerts, both traditional and more experimental, and lots of community work all around the country. We also tour internationally, and we do quite a lot of audio recordings as well. Thank you. So on to our partnership journey. It began in 2012. So again, we're coming up to an anniversary. In 2014, we had some independent research and evaluation of our work. 2018 saw the ESRC funded PhD by Dr. Robin Dowling, the now Dr. Robin Dowling, and this focused on developing a framework for in-the-moment sensory and embodied experiences for people living with dementia when engaging with music. So that's been incredibly helpful and useful for our work moving forward. 2019 saw the appointment of our creative producer. Well, that's me. A bit odd to be talking about myself, but yes, that's me. So my role, I work very closely with the concerts department at Camerata, producing concerts, and we try to push the boundaries of what we do. We try to add additional production elements. We look outside of classical music to add things maybe from theatre or from other genres to make our concepts that a little bit different. And I work with the university doing a bit of teaching, some knowledge exchange and research as well. 2019, 2020, we began our work with the Innovation Factory at the university, and they've provided extensive consultancy to help us move our move our dementia workshops online, which has enabled us to reach a huge number of people. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. 2020, we had a Simon Industrial Fellowship, and this was a 6-month placement looking at existing music projects for those living with early onset dementia, again, so we can learn from what's already out there. Now we've moved into the next phase of our dementia PhD research, and we have a new student working with us who began recently. And looking to the future, we're going to begin working with a health economist, and I'm sure there's plenty more that will come from that. Will it make the boat go faster? I was asked to put this in by Bob, so I have. I tried to find a picture of a boat, but they were all sort of landscape rather than portrait, as I'm sure you can imagine. So we've gone back to a picture of a musician there. But this question, I think, is something that we have to ask as a relatively small arts organisation. We don't have a huge capacity. We need to know that any collaboration that we embark upon is going to be fruitful, not just for us, but also for the partner. Manchester Camerata's aim is to make music that matters and make music for change. And thinking about our artistic strategy, there's 2 key points that tie in with that, but also tie in with the outputs that we've got from our collaboration with the university. And those 2 key points from our artistic strategy are to broaden access to music, thus improving the health and well-being of our audiences, and to nurture an environment that provides courage for change and courage to push boundaries. And I'll talk a little bit about how some of our collaborative projects have done that. So the partnership has enabled us to reach a lot more people, including bringing our dementia workshops online. So we have a program called Music in Mind, and these are workshops for people living with dementia. They're fabulous workshops. I recommend if you get a chance to watch one, do. We essentially bring in music therapists to assist people to write their own music. So rather than going in and playing to people, we work with them to create music that is theirs, be that with lyrics that they write, with music that they play. So what we've done through our work with the Innovation Factory here at the university is to move those workshops online, and not only move them online, but to empower and teach activity coordinators and carers to actually provide that teaching themselves. So we don't need to provide musicians in these workshops. We train up care home staff to deliver the workshops, essentially without us. I'm sure you can imagine the number of people that we're able to reach through that project. Digital research, obviously when the pandemic hit, this was of vital importance to us. We needed to very quickly shift gears. And it was something that I carried out, quite a big literature review and study of existing digital work in the orchestral world, which wasn't particularly massive at the time. It's since grown, which I'm really grateful for. But this enabled us to develop a new film series called Untold. And for this film series, we've used a professional director, producer, film company. We've worked with poets, we've worked with professional actors, and we've created a series of films that have reached a lot of people so far, and the reach is growing. The series will be continuing. But one of the most important outputs for me from that series was actually something that one of the I'll start again. So the focus of our most recent film was on a person living with early onset dementia, and he came to our music workshops and we made a film about him. It's available on YouTube if you'd like to watch it. But we had a screening for him in Wigan, where he's from, of the film. And his wife came over to me and our CEO at the end of the film, and she said that it was the first time she's ever actually been able to understand what it's like living with dementia. So this, for me, is one of the best outputs of my role so far. And we're very hopeful that the film will continue to travel through care homes, travel through different societies, and to give people that understanding of what it's actually like. And finally, to continue our work to change the way orchestral concerts are produced, and this further ties into our reputation as being Britain's most adventurous orchestra. So having this additional capacity for research and development enables us to try new things. Challenges. Of course, there's going to be challenges with any collaboration. Thank you for too many here. Pace, I think, is probably the biggest one. We are a very small, agile arts organisation. We're used to working at lightning pace. If the phone rings and someone says, we want an orchestra in Sweden next week, we make it happen. Obviously, working with the university, it's a very large organisation. There's lots of systems in place and processes, obviously, and there need to be, we understand that. So sometimes our timelines don't quite add up. So there have been some compromises there. And of course, financial challenges. Again, as a small arts organisation, small arts charity, we do find finances are a problem. So I'm sure you can imagine. All right, yeah, I'm going to finish now on something quite positive. We'd like to say that the partnership is so much more than the sum of its parts. We've got so many people to thank. Some of them are in the room, some of them are on Zoom. I've seen John McAuliffe on Zoom, who we work with. I'd like to thank John McAuliffe and Anne-Marie Nunes from Greater Manchester, Abby from the ICT, Andy Wilkinson from the Innovation Factory. We're very lucky that we work with so many different organisations or areas rather within the university. And I'd like to thank them all. My email address is on the screen if you can read it. Sorry, I didn't put that in a very good colour. Or I can put you in touch with our CEO, Bob Riley, if you'd like to ask any more questions. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so we'll attempt another screen share presentations. Welcome Stella Barnes from Community Arts North West to share stories. You can just use the arrows to move through. Good, right. Check look. Walk down. So. You click on the screen. Yep. Okay. Oh, there we go.
Hello, everybody. That was a brilliant presentation. Thank you. Mine isn't going to be anything like as organised as that. I've been writing notes for days, and we'll just see what comes out. So just a little bit about Community Arts North West. We've been established for over 40 years. We're based in central Manchester. Our main sort of thrust of our work is about working with artists, young people and communities whose voices are not normally heard in the mainstream. So people who've been pushed to the margins for all sorts of reasons, often poverty, often forced migration, often class and so on. A very big part of our work over the last 20 years has been working with communities, young people and artists who come to the UK as migrants, and particularly those who've come as asylum seekers and claimed asylum and become refugees, maybe not become refugees, and maybe been also further excluded by their immigration status. So that's been a very big part of the work, and it's a part of the work that has been very closely connected with the university. So when that program's called Exodus, and when that program was in development, the university were involved significantly in helping to set up, and particularly the drama department to help us to set up that project, and have been evaluators at various points along the way of particular elements of that project. So that history, I suppose, is why we're now working in collaboration with the organisation on the PhD programme that we're going to talk about a little bit later on. And Ambrose, sitting in the back here, who's our PhD candidate on the collaborative doctoral award. So because of the nature of our work and because of that mission, particularly to work with people who have been marginalised, pushed to the margins or always been on the margins, we're very interested in whose voices are heard, and whose voices are heard within organisations, within creative processes, voices that are heard when decisions are made, when organisations decide on their delivery models, on their programs of work, decisions that are made on a policy level within local authorities, within the arts and cultural sector, and by our funders, and then of course, as far as DCMS, we're very interested in whose voices actually get filtered through and get represented when those decisions are made. And so working with the university has been extremely important in that, because it gives us an opportunity to do some really deep thinking and deep research that a small organisation, currently 6 staff members, we don't have the resources to do that kind of work, to really delve deeply into the lived experience of artists. And this piece of research is particularly focused on artists. So we were approached by the university after all these years of our relationship to look at what would be the most valuable piece of research, particularly focusing on artists who find themselves in exile in the UK. And so that process started a couple of years ago, and a year ago we appointed Ambrose to be the PhD candidate, and began with some questions and refined them in that process. So this is the PhD programme. It's a unique opportunity to develop new thinking and profile voices that are not normally heard in the mainstream, while challenging the lack of recognition of refugee artists who are living and working in the UK. And I'm just going to show you the questions. It's very faint on the screen, but you should be able to see the questions there. So I'll read them out anyway, in case you can't see. So how do refugee heritage artists experience and navigate cultural and creative practices in the UK? That's kind of a really crucial question, because when an artist arrives in the UK, they may have a world-class practice in their art form, but they have no idea how the cultural industry works. And CAN has been really heavily involved in supporting a number of artists over the years to navigate the art system. But even with the support CAN, it's incredibly challenging to establish yourself, to get funding for your work, to get recognition against a backdrop of what we all understand as the institutional racism across the cultural sector. So not only are you arriving in a new place, you don't know your way around, maybe you're not fluent in English, you don't know how the systems work, we're also facing the same kind of level of institutional racism that all other artists who are not from dominant groups.
I'm going to, there's some problems seeing this live the other end, so if you're happy to carry on.
Yeah.
And I'll see if I can fix that in the background.
Okay. So that's a very big question for us. It's something that we've been grappling with, but because of the size of the organisation, we don't really have the tools to make that case. And so having this opportunity to work with the university and work with Ambrose is an opportunity to develop the tools and develop that kind of deep research material that enables us to make the case and have an impact on the opportunities that might be available for artists. So that comes, the question there is what opportunities are available and what are the barriers? For those that I've kind of touched on them already. I don't really want to go through all the questions, but I suppose there's a question here that we're grappling with today, which is about how can we have an impact? And I'm really interested in this. And I think probably a few years ago, I would say, well, I'm not sure who's actually listening and who's actually going to listen to these voices and how we get a seat at the table in order to have those conversations. But since I've been Creative Director of Community Arts Northwest, and especially since COVID, there seems to have been a shift in the opportunities to get a seat at the table where policy decisions are made. And I've noticed that during the pandemic, policymakers are much more interested in learning from practice and learning from the sector. So there's a kind of process here. So we need to listen, and listening is a really important part of this PhD. We need to be listening and listening to the right voices and making sure that we are listening and the right people are listening to those voices. So having Ambrose, who has lived experience of forced migration, as the listener in this research project is crucial. how we use that information, how it's accessible and how it provides us with tools to have other conversations is really important. And just for example, Dave Moutry, who's the Director of Culture, has been invited to a roundtable with Neil Mendoza and DCMS in December, and is asking the cultural sector what are the main questions that need to be asked and what are our requests in terms of the spending review. So there's a direct opportunity to have an influence at government level, and probably more so now than ever before. So this is an extremely valuable opportunity to have a voice at a national level, but also at a regional level with Manchester City Council, with the Combined Authority and so on, because they're listening in a way that they never listened before. And there's so much rhetoric around diversity coming out of Arts Council and DCMS, rhetoric around how diversity is represented in cultural recovery. It's our opportunity to really present the voices that are not normally heard in the mainstream. Just wanted to touch, I'm probably nearly out of time and I want to make sure Ambrose has a minute as well. Just one of the challenges with this piece of research in particular, and I think this is probably something that people have become very aware of since the murder of George Floyd, is that often people ask questions, people who are on the margins, people have lived experience, people who've experienced being minoritized are asked questions, but they never see the result of what happens. And so there's been sort of emerged a mistrust of people who ask the questions. So are the answers to my question, is this all this lived experience that I've been through in terms of trying to access the cultural industries, is it actually going to make a difference? And how do I know this time? Is it just going to be one of those other bits of research that sits on a shelf and doesn't impact? And so that it's so important for us to think about how we build trust and how we ensure that we communicate how this work's going to be of value for the person who gives us all that information generously, shares their experience, and for the sector as a whole. And Ambrose, do you want to come up now and add to this?
We can include it as part of the panel. I'm going to just stop that screen share so that everybody can see. That's all right. I don't know if people have been thinking of questions along the way, or if anyone can see me. Not that that's a great problem. I think it might be worth if we just shift to panelists sitting at the front, and then people online can be thinking of questions to pop into the chat. I know there were problems with the slides at the Zoom end, so if you have to share those with people who've attended, so that everyone can see that. So yeah, if we could get Abby as our chair to come up, and I'll see if I can shift the camera angles. But yeah, to make sure that everybody gets a. Where do you want me? Do you want to come? I'm going to switch to that camera.
Okay, right. So panelists, please.
There we go. This is all very high tech, most unusual, and and then I'm also going to spotlight Susie. So we can see her online.
Okay, so we have a number of esteemed panelists in the room, and also behind them the giant head of Susie. Nice to see you. So I'm Abby Gilmore, and I've already been introduced a couple of times, which is nice. And I've had a long-term engagement and experience of working between universities and with universities and the cultural sector, and so I'm kind of, everything I've heard today has really resonated with me, and I'd just like to also congratulate all the people involved in the production of the research and the reports that are coming out. I very much urge everyone online and people in the room and people who watch this video afterwards to engage with the outputs. I think there's some really rich information there, and I think notably we're lucky enough to be able to have this event because of the ESRC Social Science Festival. It's interesting to see the methods and the methodology that was used for that research,
and how it's really got to some very fine grained, but also very practical advice that's within those outputs. So I very much urge you to engage with those. As I said, I'm lucky because I've been involved from a research perspective in looking at the relationships between HEIs and cultural sector from an ESRC research network project many years ago now called Beyond the Campus with Roberta Communion, who's at King's. But I've also since then and all the way through then have had the kind of joyous experience of being one of those hybrid people that has had experience in the sector but also works within the university in a privileged position, and like JT was saying, have been able to really engage with the kind of partnerships that are embodied in our students and our graduates who come through from the Institute of Cultural Practices MA programs. We teach people who go on to either research about or work with arts, culture and heritage organisations. So I just wanted to put that back in the room. I think, you know, as JT was saying, teaching is incredibly important. Research-led teaching is incredibly important in the ways that we can embody and prolong and sustain the benefits of partnerships and collaborations between universities and the cultural sector. Enough about me really, because it's time to hear from our panellists, and I'm going to work backwards from the end so that we hear from Ambrose first, because we've just been hearing about his PhD research. And I'm going to ask each panel member to introduce themselves by name, and then to quite succinctly, please, just give us an indication of a role that you've had and your previous experience in working in a kind of collaborative context between universities and arts and cultural sector or organisations or activities. And then to identify a single challenge, if that's possible, I'm sure there are many, but also a single benefit. So over to you, Ambrose, first.
Okay, so my name is Ambrose. I'm a PhD collaborative arts student with the Department of Drama and also Arts Northwest, where, like Stella said, I'm looking at refugee artists who are working in the performing arts in the UK. Specifically, I'm interested in those who are working with poetry, theatre, and also music. Other things that I've done is over the past 8 years, I co-organized the Leicester Human Rights Arts and Film Festival, which again tries to encourage people to engage with human rights issues at home and abroad through the arts. And I'm also an arts and culture columnist for Peace News, and I facilitate Civic Leicester, which, among other things, also publishes poetry anthologies. Our latest poetry anthology is Black Lives Matter, Poems for a New World, which was released last year. And we had the privilege of being hosted by the University of York as part of the promotions tours. So in all those aspects of the work that I've been doing, it wouldn't be possible to do them alone. You can try, but there's not much fun in doing things alone. It's always better when you do things with people or with institutions, organizations. Part of the challenges, especially within the environment that we are in, one of them is that there have been restrictions where we couldn't travel, we couldn't gather because of COVID restrictions. Advantages, I've already mentioned them, that it's always really, you know, when people meet, good things happen. One of the good things that happen is that, you know, ideas have a way of rubbing against each other and changing and turning into other things and creating new possibilities. That's the part that I find, you know, very, very exciting, which, yeah, is just yes, all sorts of, if we were to visualize it, it would be like fireworks that also lead to other possibilities. That is the fun part. Have I missed anything?
No, I don't think, well, I'm sure you could tell us more and more, but thank you for introducing kind of perhaps the most obvious thing about collaboration is that you're not doing it alone, you're doing it with other people. That's really, and also thanks for emphasising that it doesn't, that I like the idea of rubbing against, you know, the kind of friction, creative tension that might come from doing things collectively. So thank you. We'll move on and we'll maybe hear more in terms of questions and answers later, but we'll move on to Ian, who's sitting next to you, for Ian Scott. So tell us something.
Yes, you want me to do it in quick time, don't you? So I'll try and be as fast as I possibly can. Hello, everybody in the room and online. So my name is Ian Scott. I'm Professor of American Film and History here at Manchester. I was the School of Arts, Languages and Cultures Director for Social Responsibility, Business Engagement and Internationalisation up until this last summer, before I took on the role. I'm now Head of Department for English, American Studies and Creative Writing. So in one sense, both of those roles helped to straddle a lot of the work and my interests that people have been speaking about today. And I'm involved in the Aspect project that Alicia has been working on over the course of the last year or so, which JT, hello again JT, it's very nice to have you back at Manchester, who used to be in our department previously, is going to join us on as part of a collaboration. How did I arrive in the previous role and what was my involvement and interest? I suppose two sides really. From an academic perspective, I'd previously been Associate Dean for Internationalisation in the Faculty of Humanities, and that came out of the fact that I'm an Americanist, and therefore I've been involved in a lot of international education over the years, and particularly the university's focus then and still is on the way in which it can cultivate and get into the North American market, both for recruitment of students and projects and collaborations with particular North American institutions. I was part of the team that negotiated the now university level partnership that we have with the University of Toronto, for instance. So that led me into the social responsibility business engagement role. And I was fascinated in that probably for two reasons. One, because it enabled me to be, which I think is one of the most critical things in drawing these two bodies together, the academics and institutions and also practitioners and those like Stella and others, Ambrose who's part of us, but also working on the outside with different cultural bodies and stakeholders, acting as a kind of conduit, if you like, for those groups and organisations to come together and to work out the kind of relationship that we have with them and how we can be mutually supportive in that kind of way. Why was I a fit for that in any kind of way? Happenstance rather than planning. I was a fit for it in a way because I happened to be a practitioner myself and work partly for reasons I won't bore you with. I worked in and researched California politics for many years, which, as I always tell for people, was perfect preparation for a career writing about Hollywood film, which is basically what I've done since. And I happen to have worked in documentary on radio and TV. So I knew the other side a little bit of people who were practitioners who worked in creative industries. And I knew from their side that a traditional, and I was part of it, a traditional kind of relationship between the way so-called experts, I'm using that term advisedly when it comes to me, experts get pulled into projects within the creative side is usually as consultants. And we happen to know something about the project and people are making some film or documentary or something, or writing something about it. I was partly working on both sides of that. I also happened to work in a film school in the United States where I was teaching students to make movies who were going to go on and work in the Hollywood industry. That usually happens as well when I start to some convenient interruption that's telling me to stop. So I understood from both sides that there was a need, I think a lot of people have said it already today, a need to communicate and understand language and understand the way in which those relations worked, really. And when I first started doing it, it was very clear that neither side really understood the other. I was a sort of, academic wonk who knew a thing or two about a certain particular subject. And there was a kind of
creative side to that, who wanted that expertise, but didn't really know how to work with universities in a wider sense. All that has changed in the course of about a decade and a half that I've been doing this. And one of the things that I'm most interested in now, and my department is obviously, very representative of that. John, who's part of that department, is leading a major platform that is looking to coalesce so much of our creative power in the university and put it at the disposal of the cultural sector and industries, both locally, nationally, and internationally. And that's what I've been interested in through my professional career from both sides for a long period of time. That's the benefit. What's the challenge? The challenge is how to make that work and how to kind of, I think more, it's not so much now. I think academics are beginning to learn and understand the ways in which they can work outside. I think the challenge for us in many ways is to try and bring in more of the partners who haven't traditionally worked in the university context, more of the partners into the institutional fold and make them understand what we can do and the kind of power and influence they can use with us as an institution to try and advance their own goals and ambitions in a way. That's the challenge. And I was trying to do it in the director role, and I continue to try and do it in the head of department role. That was way too long.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you. We'll come back to some of those questions. Let's turn quickly to Ben, who I know from actually a kind of partnership setting from the university, but he's now moved outside of the cultural sector. Over to you, Ben, to tell us more about that.
Thanks. I was just going to say how great you were as a supervisor. So now I work as a partnership manager for a scientific organisation. I've been invited here today to talk to you about the knowledge transfer partnership that Abby was the academic supervisor on. And this was a partnership between the University of Manchester and the National Trust. And it was set up because a lot of individual academics at the university had worked with the trust and seen some benefits, but there had been some real challenges. So my role was to troubleshoot, identify what those challenges were and think about ways of smoothing them out so that the partnerships could be mutually beneficial. And that kind of proper planning and mutual benefit, I think, is the biggest benefit. So most of the academics who worked with us at the Trust were keen to demonstrate the impact of their research outside of the university to a wide audience. And the National Trust had that audience that, that could really engage with that research. And the National Trust had a real drive, first of all, to become an independent research organisation, so it had to be working with the right people, and also to make the visitor programmes and the visitor experience, including creative visitor programmes, to underpin them with high quality research and make them more interesting and attract more people. Challenges I would say between the National Trust and the university was, as we heard in the first presentation today, the kind of cultural differences. So the National Trust would say, like, oh yeah, we've done your impact and evaluation for you. And then we'd give the academic this paltry one side of A4. They'd be like, oh, we need a lot more than that, actually. So translating what different organisations mean by different things was a real challenge. And also timescales, I would say. So academics were also very keen to do their impact work in the summer holidays. And the National Trust was like, oh God, that's our busiest time. We've not got time to do anything. Each partner needs to understand the other's needs and timescales.
Thank you. And there's an example from a very successful knowledge transfer partnership that shows that you can use that as an instrument to drive collaboration. And it isn't just the sort of widget-based businesses or engineering or whatever. And we've now got a second KTP that was working with the same team that you were with Liverpool organisation and the ICP. So it's definitely a model that can work, and I think the work that you did there, looking at research partnerships, has really demonstrated that. Susie, I'm going to turn to you last, just in case we have any technical problems. So I'm sorry for leaving you up there as the Wizard of Oz just a little bit longer. But next, I want to turn to Sarah. So please tell us about your experience, your role, and kind of key challenge, key benefit, and who you are.
Yes, so my name is Sarah, both to the room and to those on the screen. I'm head of the Salford Culture and Place Partnership to try to condense Salford rather than having a person leading on culture. We have a partnership leading across culture, creativity and place. The partnership has, just a little bit of context, anchor institutions for the partnership are Arts Council England, Salford City Council, the University of Salford, and the Lowry as the city's flagship cultural institution, but also includes national organizations like the BBC and RHS with Media City and the Bridgewater Gardens as the nodes. Artist-led organizations like Walk the Plank in Islington Mill, and low bows to Liz Pugh, who's with us from Walk the Plank today, and organizations like Salford CVS and Salford Community Leisure as delivery bodies. We'll have 3 more by January. It's shifting and changing. But I'm the head, meaning I'm the eyes and ears and mouth, but most of the time my job is more like the connective tissue, the circulatory system. So partnership and collaboration and cultural difference and the rift and the shift, that's my bread and butter. So happy to be here today. In terms of experience, like so many other people in the room, I have that hybrid. I worked for 14 years in higher education as an academic before starting in this role about 2.5 years ago, and have worn both hats. So as an academic, I led just random examples. I led an academic and documentary team within a project at the Grotowski Institute in Wrocław, Poland for 3 years. I wore both hats as a sort of social entrepreneur in a charity and doing action research at the University of Salford. And now the role as the Culture and Place Partnership, we're working with Abby and colleagues at the Creative Industries Tech, the Global Cultural District Network, the University of Salford across so kind of know both sides. And in terms of the hybrid, I'm so glad that people have talked about translation, cultural differences. I think beyond translator, we also have to code switch as hybrids because we can see it from both sides, and it's not just the language. I don't have to say this very much, but it's the culture sitting behind the language and the norms that we can't see and that are harder to put our fingers on. So that code switching, I think, is a key thing. Around challenges, I think one of the main things is there was a heck of a lot of weight with the word expert, as you've alluded to, Ian, or leader. Like you need to know what the answer is. But if we focus our research on in collaboration on what we know, we don't get very far, and the impact of that work is not very deep. And so to go to the edges of our knowing, and that is risky. It's risky reputationally, it's risky from an institutional reputation, whether your organization is massive, small, your brand is huge, but you've got 2 part-time staff, whatever that might be. So I think the weight and the need to know can be a real disruptor in terms of getting into deep impact, open collaboration. And this is a little tricky, but I would love to say it, especially on the back of Stella's presentation as a case study. When professional life is a slog, it's really hard to feel your privilege, not only acknowledge it, but feel it and the edges of it. So how to handle cultural leaders? There's a heck of a lot of privilege in what I do. Academics, there's a heck of a lot of privilege in what they all do. So I think those are some of the challenges, needing to know and understanding how much privilege comes with just being able to have these conversations. On the flip side, in terms of opportunities, if you're brave, and I love the fact that Rebecca uses the term bravery and courage in the presentation about Manchester Camerata, and you're willing to go in as an expert and novice at the same time, and go to the edges to say, I don't know anything about it. I really want to be open and learn. Then where you can go and share the risk together in not knowing really opens up honest conversations, real impact. And I guess the final thing is, in terms of policy implications, making a difference, having it matter, having the time and effort really matter, having understanding be a 3-dimensional thing, and where you will not get all the dimensions, where it's a field rather than a spectrum, so that there is an understanding at micro and macro, and knowing that your perspective will just determine what's really close and what's far away. And I think if we go in with a sense of openness, risk, and wanting to stay at the edges of what we know and understand, along with proper planning and mutual benefit at the heart of it, and the parity of respect, then actually our resource is not limited. Our resource, if we can build those partnerships, is kind of endless. And I'll stop.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Sarah, and so much there to think about, and also particularly aware of the sorts of language that you're using that allow a kind of broader landscape, the metaphors that you're using that kind of give us different ways into to listening, Stella said earlier, and to hearing different voices. Susie, please can I turn to you now?
Thank you. I'm absolutely delighted that I can't see my own disembodied head floating in space. And I kind of wish I put more makeup on this morning as well. But anyway, thank you for having me. You've got my biography, I think, and you'll see that I as well wear several different hats concurrently, but I believe the hat that I'm mainly wearing here today is that of co-director of the relatively newly established National Centre for Academic and Cultural Exchange. We're a 4-year project, just coming to the end of our first year, so you've caught me at a good time because we're just publishing our first primary research, and we're supported by Research England to really look at the how of collaboration as well as the what, to support really excellent, to support and showcase really excellent collaboration between the arts and cultural sector and higher education. And also our particular emphasis is on evidencing the impact of these collaborations, and in particular the social, environmental and cultural as well as economic impacts of this work. And I guess where we differ from other projects that certainly step into this area, like the Centre for Cultural Value or the Creative Policy and Evidence Centre at Nesta, is that we're really concerned only with research and collaboration with the arts and cultural sector rather than on the arts and cultural sector. So that's our USP, if you like. Personally, my background is in the arts and cultural sector, but I've been working in this space between higher education and the arts and creative industries for nearly 15 years now, which is quite scary. And I consider it a huge privilege that I've never really been embedded in a single HEI or arts organisation, but every day I work across a really wide range of organisations, from large research intensive, post-92, small specialist, dance, drama and art conservatoires, and the same within the cultural sector, from very large flagship national organisations, IROs, down to individual artists, and working with a cross-sector and different permutations of a huge range of organisations across the two different industries every day is a really extraordinary opportunity. And what motivates me to work in this field is a genuine belief that by bringing together the research community, arts and creative industries and our wider partnerships as appropriate around issues of common concern for discussion, networking and collaborative activities, we can really generate profound social and cultural benefits, and creating careful and curated opportunities, platforms and spaces and methods to develop and support genuine collaborations and partnerships is really what gets me out of bed in the morning. Thinking about the advantages or the opportunities for this kind of work, I suppose the first thing that springs to mind for me is relevance. So, although I don't like to use the term resilience, and the reason I don't like to use it is I think, really drilling into this interesting conversation that we're starting around privilege, inclusion and equity, I think the term resilience is often used to put the onus on the individual, often minoritized individuals, to prop up systems that are not fit for purpose. So you're asking the individual to take on the stress and the kind of onus of propping up these systems. But anyway, I'm going to use resilience in its truest sense of the word, thinking about the way that we can adapt, bounce back and become stronger. We're all working in this very VUCA environment that's volatile, uncertain, changeable and ambiguous, a rather strange term that actually comes out of the military, I believe. But we have these huge challenges and often huge unanticipated changes, and we need to place ourselves within a network of like-minded partners to ensure that our work remains relevant and impactful, and that we as organizations or individuals have the capacity to adapt and change the way that we work and how work connects with and remains relevant to society. And I think, you know, don't underestimate how important good partnerships and relationships are to our personal capacity and well-being and ability to carry out really relevant and impactful work. I think, you know, we know how draining bad collaborations and relationships can be. So find those relationships that enrich and inspire you to move your work forward. In terms of challenges, again, there are many, but I think for me, a particular challenge is finding the capacity to develop really value-based and equitable and impactful collaborations when, yes, there are many barriers that, you know, some of which we've spoken about today, but I think one issue our work at NCASE has identified is that so many of these opportunities for collaboration are very project-based, time-limited, delivery-focused, and actually really quite transactional. And there's often not the opportunity to develop genuine partnerships, understanding of each other's operating environments and motivations, and to really think about how you want to work together as well as what you want to do. And as a result, we do see that collaborations are not as resilient in the good sense of the word as they could be. It was really fabulous to hear from your case studies that here are some relationships that were able to really deepen and respond to the pandemic. But we unfortunately have heard of many relationships that did not survive the pandemic from both our academic and cultural partners. And actually that communication just stopped and the collaborations fell apart at arguably the point when these relationships were most needed, not only by the individual organisations, but the communities that they serve. So I think I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, and thank you for reminding us of those kind of key distinctions that we heard earlier in relation to the research reports and the idea of engagement with rather than on. Thinking about those distinctions when you're establishing what kind of work you want to do together, and also again, thank you also for reminding us about, you know, the arts and cultural sector, the creative economy, the creative industries is very differentiated. We need to think about the different capacities and scales that there are across different organisations and individuals, and particularly also that other point about placing emphasis on individuals who may be least able to and have already had to find capacities to go through institutional barriers, and we're asking them to come into the fold. Stella and I had a conversation earlier about recruitment and diversity for governance, which is something that I think universities could really, really support. They could do some of that investment of our privilege into capacities so that places, organisations can take risks and kind of and can sit on them, you know, to go into the unknown a little bit more. And one of those ways that we could do is we could properly support, you know, and train people to come and support cultural organisations in their governance settings. The research that we're undertaking at the moment with some value on the impacts of COVID is a partnership project with the PET, which is on, it is on rather than with, but in our case, working with Solve, that it's definitely with. One of the things that we're finding that's really hitting arts and cultural organisations is that they've needed to turn to trustees for more capacity because of the pandemic. And so that's something that I think the universities could really support. So I'd like to open up to questions. I don't know if there are any questions online or in the room that we're based in, or from you, Susie, also online, or between the panelists. Does anyone want to start, make a comment or ask a question?
There's nothing online yet, but I'm quite interested in the kind of the methods of collaborating and whether there's sort of any particular examples of the creative process as the collaboration and not the conversation and the does that sort of make sense? It's not quite a question yet, but whether it is the sitting around and the talking that is the most useful, or whether it's the doing something creative with this particular sector in mind.
So the making together, the kind of co-production to some degree, as well as the relationship element. And are you thinking particularly about actually creating, artworks or
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I have almost literally come down from the Design Council's event, Design for Planet, which took an artistic social research project and installed it outside the V&A in Dundee and had people walking around it and talking, but it features work and voices from people who've done the same thing previously, and then that becomes a piece of work that's shown within the physical shed, which is what it is. But so there's a making and there's a collaborating in part of that, but whether there are other examples that spring to mind or might be interesting, and whether there's any sort of friction and ideas that bump against each other as part of this panel and go off to do something interesting. Really.
Can I turn to you, Ambrose? Is this something, because you talked before about your long-term experience as a cultural producer, as somebody who's involved in the written word and spoken word. So how are you bringing that into your research with Cam?
So I'm interested to have a long interest in migration, and also in the arts, and also in the intersection with all these things with community action. Very interested in them and have been for many years. With Ken, for example, one of the things that we did working with those interests is we co-organized an event with the Manchester Poetry Library, where we had a Black Lives Matter meetings and conversation, where we also had conversations with other poets who have experienced either forced migration or migration in general, and were living in Manchester. And we had them together with poets featured in Black Lives Matter, in the anthology. Other aspects of the collaborations, other collaborations include in 2015, was suggested a poetry anthology responding to the migration crisis. The book was published by 5 Leaves Publications. And then from there, I'm now coordinating a translation project, which is translating that anthology into other languages. We have an Italian version that was published last year. Currently, we're proofing a Romanian translation, and there's a possibility that next year or the year after, we'll be working on a Hungarian or Polish or Spanish or French translation of the same. And going back again to poems in Overland, Oversea, some of them have been adapted to music. Others have been translated into sign language. Others have been translated into artworks. So I think it's all of it, What I find exciting is when you work with people who are willing, when you form coalitions of the willing, that the things that you can do are potentially transformative, in my view. This is the experience that and it's also deeply exciting, very, very exciting.
Susie has okay, yeah, I was going to, so Susie has a question or a comment.
So you've got a hand up.
You've got your hand up.
Yes, I've got my hand up.
Yeah, I was going to turn to you actually, because as Ambrose was talking there, I was thinking about the kind of knowledge and who the audiences are, who's listening to those poems that are being produced, and what are the effects. But I don't know if that has any relationship to your comment or your question.
Yes and no. I just wanted to jump in and let people know that we just published, it's quite a quick and dirty piece of work, actually, a rapid evidence and literature review looking at skills and capacity for knowledge exchange between the arts and cultural sector and higher education, which has been completed by Dr. Kyla Rose at Bath Spa University. And you'll be pleased to hear that your work, Abby, features very broadly through the literature review, certainly. And I think that's thrown up some really interesting questions for us in terms of, you know, this. As perhaps you wouldn't be too surprised to know that it's quite difficult to find examples of best practice in the literature for knowledge exchange between the arts and cultural sector and higher education. And I think partly this is because knowledge exchange isn't a term that's widely used outside of HE, but we found it much easier to locate examples of best practice in the social sciences, in health, and in other disciplines. That's not to say that the literature is not there, it's just very difficult to find it. And then of course the other thing that we find, and this comes up in all our literature reviews, that almost everything is written from the side of higher education rather than the arts and cultural sector. And I'm sure we can all appreciate what some of the reasons for that might be. But really, you know, there are a couple of key things coming through that literature and evidence review that I just wanted to drop into the conversation. One that is, if you believe, as I think nearly all of us do, that this kind of idea of co-creation is the gold standard for knowledge exchange. Actually, higher education has a lot to learn from the arts and cultural sector in this respect. And the other point that I wanted to make, that we kind of firmly believe at NCASE, and we'll be doing more work on this over the next couple of years, is that although some of these other identified models of good practice from other disciplines may well be replicable, transferable, adaptable, and really great for doing what we do. We don't yet know that, but we think it's really, really important for arts and cultural organisations and artists and higher education to work together to develop these methodologies and models of good practice and share them. And that there is almost like this missing middle in knowledge exchange, if you like, the how, the methods, as well as the what comes out the other end of it. And we may all be doing, you know, wonderful things quite intrinsically, but if we don't write them down and claim them as our own, they're just lost in terms of, you know, finding the literature and evidence to support the value and the excellence in what we do.
Yes, thank you. That feels a little bit like the REF model is not great at capturing the actual value of practice-based research. Just to, I don't know if that's the wrong summary of what you've just said, but it feels like a bit of a clarion call for when, you know, when practice and making things together and co-production of knowledge that has different kinds of outputs to the written text and that isn't ordered in the same way, but has incredibly valuable outcomes. We heard from Becky earlier talking about somebody understanding something through seeing film practice recorded, a kind of particular engagement between you know, people through culture. That seems to be incredibly powerful. We've all been at places where we've written the very long reports or the research paper, and then it's the voice that says it articulately at the end, or child space that's happy, or so on, that really impacts on the policymaker, or really changes the view. So it does feel like more recognition of practice-based research and practice-based knowledge that is co-produced is important in this agenda. We have just 2 minutes left before we need to close, so I wanted to see if there were any final closing comments from the panel, if anything you feel that you haven't been able to say. So I'll work this. Oh, sorry, Ian's got his hand up. Ian,
well, I only wanted to respond. I mean, I suppose it acts as a summary. I only want to respond to Susie in 2 levels, really. One is that I agree very much with the point, but if it's true, which it seems to be, that the increasing move towards a greater significance for impact case studies within the REF is right, then that's one of the areas where we both have to work towards that, because it's obviously going to have significance for the way in which particularly universities are assessed and looked at in this area. The second one is really a practical one. And again, it just comes, you know, happens to come from my own experience in areas like North America. I think there's a very good and very particular reason why arts and cultures have struggled in this way from the British HE perspective. In North America, alumni associations that have a long tradition of cultivating the relations with their graduates who work in a whole variety of different areas and sectors of the arts and culture, never let that go through their time. They cultivate it for a long period of time. It does become a long list of shameless name dropping, but actually that's very, very important because it provides access and it provides utility in ways in which both the institutions themselves can get into particular sectors, but also that they can use that name recognition to buy kudos and credit for what they want to do.
Thank you. I think that's really important. It's not just about fundraising as well, it's also about the principle of the university staying with you for the rest of your life. You take the university knowledge out into the world. Ben, do you have any kind of closing remarks?
Yeah, so I was going to talk about the REF as well. I think it's great, and obviously that's high on the list of things that academics are interested in. But my experience with the National Trust is, oh yeah, maybe we'll do a REF, but I want to do this because it makes my research better or because I really enjoy working in partnership. And I think sometimes that side of things is overlooked and people are thinking quite transactionally about how to get stuff from working in partnership. But actually it's fun and it is interesting and it does make both sides better.
Thank you. So I was going to say something and it's a bit risky. So having come from the academic world and now working more in the cultural world, if you play it by the rules, you'll tick points, but the impact is likely to be less, is my experience. That if it's a really good rep output, freaking fantastic, but is it likely to be helpful for the collaboration? I don't know. So if you take the lanes as they're put before you and you go down them, you go much further in a straight line, but the impact that you're going to have through collaboration doesn't take the account that what's impactful for both sides. What I would say is, in terms of the question that you started with, is don't talk for too long. Talk, please, so you know where your common ground is. Then start doing, because then all the talk falls away and you're doing it. But then don't do too long before stopping to talk again, because we all know a 5-degree change changes the trajectory of where you're going. So that iterative process of talk, get doing, and step back, listen, get doing, step back, talk, that iterative process, even if it doesn't follow the lane that's before you, the likelihood is people are so much more interested in the stuff that's happening on the margins because that's where we all want to go, even though, and that's usually where collaboration takes us, to the margins of what we know we would want to find out and what impact it can have.
Thank you. We have, and I think we should honour it because the authors of the report.
I'll be very quick. I wanted to respond to the comment about the missing middle, and it got me thinking about this next phase that we're on with ASPEC. That if indeed what we need to do is create documents and outputs that are really going to be beneficial to both sides. You know, we've been thinking that I'm writing this paper or that JT and I are writing this paper, but really it should be written. It should be co-written with someone who's a practitioner in the field. I have been myself a practitioner in the field, but I've come pretty heavily into academia and teaching now. And I just think it's worth further discussion.
Thank you. Susie, I don't want to leave you out. You're online. Any very, very tiny final comments? Or
No.
Read the literature review.
Yeah, not really, just to say that we, as well as the kind of skills and capacity evidence and literature review that I've mentioned, we have just published our main literature review. We've also done an analysis of the impact case studies from the last REF. Hopefully we'll get our MITs on the latest REF soon. And I haven't got time to talk about it in detail, but it does show that actually practice-based research and impact from collaboration is already, I think, the second kind of most cited kind of source of impact when you're thinking about narratives that include arts and culture. We've also just published a textual analysis of the first iteration of KEF as well, looking at the knowledge exchange framework from the point of view of arts and culture, who's talking about it, who's doing what, and all those resources are freely available on our website, so please do dive into them as would be helpful to you.
Thank you. That's great to hear, both of those things, and also a reminder for us to tell people to check out the NCASE website and also the outputs from the research supported by Aspect and Alicia and Samuel and JT and team have been involved in. Victoria, do you want to do any closing?
I will just say thank you very much to the people in the room and on the Zoom, to all of the speakers and to the panelists, and I will send out notes. The recording will finish at some point, we hope. I'll send out slides from the speakers and also links. If anybody wants to share any more, then I'll put those into one email and send them around. And inevitably, there will also be an email asking you to fill in a survey about how you found out about the event and what you thought of it, because we have had this generous funding from ESRC and they'd like to know. So, thank you very much.
No, thanks everyone for being involved in such a rich conversation.
Great.